Hey everyone, I'm here with my colleague Tristan Justice. This is Emily Jashinsky, culture editor at The Federalist. We're about to discuss an article that Tristan published recently. It's titled, "A Neighbor You Like Probably Voted for Trump." It's a great article, and I think it's something that a lot of people need to hear right now in particular. And it's something I'm not sure that the left totally understands. I think personally, the key to the headline here is that, and Tristan and I, we can talk about this a little bit. Tristan originally suggested the story as a neighbor and one of your neighbors probably voted for Trump. And I thought, well, maybe we should add a neighbor you like probably voted for Trump because, frankly, I think that's sort of the key here is that we all, we don't know our neighbors probably as well as people did in general as a whole in decades past. But, there are a lot of neighbors we have that we like, and we might not talk about politics with them, but they might have some ideas you don't like. So Tristan, thanks so much for joining. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the argument you make in this article and what inspired you to write it?
Well, one thing that you said is we all have neighbors that we like. We just don't know who they voted for. A lot of us probably like our neighbors because we don't know who they voted for. And that's probably the case in a lot of places around the country, which is also just unfortunate. It's sad that our country has gotten to such a place where we judge people based on who they voted for at the ballot box rather than who they are. And so I was motivated to write the piece after a few days ago. I moved to Denver in July. And one of my first friends here, a neighbor of mine, ended the relationship because after the election, because they thought what I did for a living was destroying the country. They likened standard media criticism to empowering white supremacist groups. And so I was really motivated to write this piece and kind of flesh out the data here on how Trump scored more than 73 million American votes just this month, more than any other president in American history. Of course, he was beaten the popular vote by Joe Biden, but 73 million is a big figure. And so I dove into the data a little bit and found that the support for Trump is way more widespread than people tend to think. Yeah, Joe Biden won the popular vote by about 6 million votes, but all of those extra votes are concentrated in these liberal enclaves in California, Washington, Oregon, and New York. And in fact, if the vote had broken even in California, then Joe Biden would have only won the popular vote by 1 million. And if the gap had closed in New York, then the popular vote would have been even across the country. And so it just goes to show how President Trump really landed broad, widespread support in this election. And I wanted to personalize that for people and show them, look, support for the president is a lot more widespread than you might think. And you probably have a neighbor who you very much like who supported this president in this election.
So the counterpoint to that would be, I'm well aware. I'm playing devil's advocate, by the way. I'm going to put my sort of like leftist cap on right now, which is
the leftist. I see.
right. They would say, for instance, I know exactly how many people voted for Trump. I know that it was a huge number, but in fact, I'm willing to accept this about the country, that huge swath of the country is in fact bigoted. And, what we're realizing, and this is, I think, something that we've seen a lot in the media since 2016, is not reckoning with the fact that a wider swath of the country than you realized has different ideas from you, but that a wider swath of the country than you realized is bigoted, right? So what do you say to people who would contend, I'm well aware that many people voted for Trump. I'm well aware that support for Trump is widespread, but those shy Trump voters should be shy because they're supporting bigotry.
And that's really at the heart of the division. I mean, I end my piece saying, look, if you have an issue, if the fact that one of your neighbors might support Trump and you don't know it terrifies you, then you're the one with the problem. And I think we really need to challenge the premise of what does it mean to be bigoted in this country now? For years, the left has really liberalized these ideas of what it means to be racist, homophobic, sexist, and all these different things. And so now we see these social justice yard signs going up around neighborhoods across the country, calling their neighbors who don't agree with them and all these liberal mantras bigoted, horrible human beings. We've created, even though support for the president's widespread, we still kind of created two Americas here. And I think the media and the rhetoric coming from the Democratic elites really to blame for that by condemning anyone who disagrees with them as racist, they're ignorant, uneducated, they don't know what they're talking about, they're homophobic, they're just hateful people, which really isn't the case.
Yeah. Well, let's have some fun here. A couple of comments that rolled in. I think people didn't realize, maybe they tuned in late, that I was playing devil's advocate. I got, my goodness, aren't you a stupid girl? And Emily, you're an idiot who buys into the mainstream media. No, 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 no. I was representing their perspectives on this, which really is, as Tristan gets at. That's a lot of the problem here, is that because there are so many leftists who have come from academia, and it's key to say cultural leftists, people who buy into these notions, these radical notions about how we should expand the definitions of racism and white supremacy and sexism and just bigotry in general. That is what we've imported into the culture at large now. It hasn't just sort of stayed on college campuses. There are now a lot of people in this country who genuinely believe that anybody who supports Donald Trump is necessarily racist. And that's a huge part of the issue here. So, I mean, I think that's like actually really the key. And that's the heart of all this. It's what I've referred to in the past as the progressive or binary, in that you either are fully progressive and you agree with everything in the progressive agenda, or you are a bigot, and there's no wiggle room in between. There's no saying, well, I don't know about that particular definition of racism or bigotry or whatever it is. So, Tristan, my question to you is, what can be done in the future to rectify the situation?
Well, that's $1 million question, but I want to hit on the college campus thing that you just mentioned. So for years, conservatives were the only people reporting on all the campus insanity that we saw happen on all these campuses across the country. And the media would try to justify it because they would graduate from the very same campuses these things came from. But conservatives were the only ones reporting on all of this insanity happening. And at the end of the day, it kept going by unnoticed and unchallenged by legacy institutions. And so it became an accepted form of our mainstream culture now, because all those people who came up from these campuses where all these ideologies have come from have now mainstream these fringe left-wing ideologies in all of the leadership places of our legacy institutions. So now places like the New York Times are being run by people who could have been a bunch of college professors on today's campus, people who are operating other like Hollywood, other institutions that are controlling the cultural direction of our country, came up truly believing that anyone who disagrees with them must have such an ignorant worldview that they must be bigoted, racist, and homophobic. And so the college campus dilemma is really at the heart of this ideological plague that's just infecting our country, and now it's just blowing up out of proportion.
You know, something interesting about Tristan's writing, which you should all follow, is that he often makes these arguments based off of, he'll have a personal experience, and then it'll inspire him to write something exactly like this piece, which I'm going to repeat the headline because I think it captures your argument, which is great, so very well. Tristan's headline is, "A neighbor you like probably voted for Trump." Now, Tristan, this is something that you've dealt with personally. You've dealt with people who find out what you do for a living or find out that you're conservative. And this goes back to when you were in college. But this has happened more recently to you as an adult, and they have issues with it. What do you say whenever that, let's call it an obstacle, social obstacle, pops up?
Well, I usually apologize, not for what I do and who I voted for, but for their own intolerance. I mean, I'm really sorry that these people have such a closed-minded view of the world around them. I was actually denied for my first lease here in Denver because of who I voted for. I interviewed with this landlord lady. I was in DC doing a FaceTime interview with a landlord who was renting out a room that's actually just up the street from here. I mean, I can walk out my front porch and I can see the house that I was originally intending to live at. And her second question was, well, did you vote for Trump? I said, yes. And to rub it in a little bit, I said, in Ohio. So, and right away, she said, this isn't going to work for me. I can't live with a white supremacist here. I'm not going to, you work at a white supremacist platform. You empower white supremacists. You're just as guilty as people who want to commit lynchings. And so, I mean, I just looked at her. It was like, I mean, I'm sorry that you have such an intolerant, closed-minded view of the world around you, but I mean, I'm not going to apologize for what I do and who I voted for. And she said that I was a literal danger to the minority neighborhood. And so now I've been here about 6 months. And so I thought about reaching out or something and just, I mean, asking her how she's doing, because I mean, clearly I'm so dangerous after 6 months of living here. I mean, it really is remarkable the level of polarization that our country has gotten to. Just in Denver, 71,000 people still voted for Trump here in Denver. Now it's less than 20% of the voting population, or less than 20% of people who came out and voted this November, but 71,000 still not an absent number. And so those people have been shown to exist. They're not talking about it. And given the rhetoric that we're seeing from Democrats in the media, they have good reason not to talk about it at times. I mean, Democrats want to literally punish people who voted for Donald Trump. People want to actually punish those who might have donated to the Trump campaign. People want others fired for having voted for Trump. And so, look, if I wasn't in politics, I would probably have good reason not to be an outspoken Republican, considering my background, my friend groups, the different things I like, people who surround me. But our country has just become so divided. It's tearing relationships apart.
Yeah, it certainly is. And it is very sad because there's this notion that like, it's very, it's actually not funny. It's sort of beyond the point of being laughable, as it first was. But the notion that you are a white supremacist sort of just masquerading as this normal millennial college graduate journalist is really sad, because for me, it's really sad in particular because there are actual white supremacists in this world
and
do terrible things. Right. And to sort of expand the boundaries of what constitutes white supremacy so that they encompass anybody of these 70, million people who voted for Donald Trump. It's terrible, but they do expand the boundaries to implicate just normal people in white supremacy or Trump voters in white supremacy. Right. People, and that includes, by the way, a lot of Black voters and a lot of Hispanic voters, which just, it makes no sense. It's completely incoherent. But the left would uphold that definition of white supremacy, even as it applies to Black voters and Hispanic voters, by saying it's just that they've been doing this with women for years, right? Like even women can be sexist and anti-women. And they would argue, it's internalized misogyny, it's internalized racism. They would say all of these different things. And it's, at the end of the day, it's so unfortunate because we've created this boogeyman of 70 million plus white supremacists in this country, when in fact there's been so much progress and there's been so much work done. And there's been so much blood spilled and sweat poured out to, greatly lessen the number of white supremacists in this country.
And that's a really terrifying reality to think about. I mean, if you are truly convinced that anyone who voted for Donald Trump is actually white supremacist, then living in a country where 73 million Americans are white supremacists must be an absolutely terrifying reality to live in, to think about. I mean, it just must be exhausting to think that everybody is racist. But there's still a lot of people probably in California who might not actually have neighbors who voted for Trump. I mean, look, Trump, he lost California by 5 million votes. And so I'm sure there are places in California where it's true, not a single person on certain streets voted for Trump. But at the end of the day, so many people across the country voted at the ballot box to support Trump, and they left their support there, and they won't talk about it because the cultural stigma that our mainstream elites have put on voting for Trump has become so overbearing. I think the way forward, the way forward and out of this is it's not going to be pretty.
Right. And here's the last thing that I want to close out on here is that in your headline, the distinction is a neighbor that you like might have voted for Donald Trump. And why do you think it's important what do you think is persuasive about that? So if people are kind of looking around at their neighbors, people who they like and they trust, and they might, give keys to their house, why does it matter that it's a Trump voter who also happens to be their neighbor? Is there something you think might be persuasive or emotionally gripping about that?
Yeah, I think it really humanizes our polarization here, because I think a lot of times we read about polarization, we hear about polarization, and we think we sometimes understand our divisions, but I don't think it really hits home for a lot of people, how their own rhetoric can not only maybe drive people away from them, or their own rhetoric could be alienating people they know who are close to them from sharing their opinions with them. And these are people that they probably love. I mean, a neighborhood is a rich, vibrant community where a lot of people are very close with one another. There's that old mantra, it takes a village to raise a child. And these people who voted for Trump, the data really has come out and shown these are not people on the fringes of society. These are people who you go to the bus stop in the morning with and put your kids on the bus to school every morning. These are people who, I mean, maybe you have your children in a pod with these people right now while your school is shut down. Maybe they're people whose neighbor you have their kids watch your animals while you're gone. So these are real people who we love and cherish, who I just think people need to realize that politics is not an end-all be-all to everything that's great about life and neighborhood and community.
Yeah, and Tristan, have you read Alienated America by Tim Carney?
I've gotten through half.
So anyway, listening, that book is absolutely essential to understanding absolutely everything that we're talking about, which Tristan, I think, hits on something and has identified something really important about neighbors. And Carney's thesis is particularly interesting because he shows how community ties, like the strength or weakness of ties in a community, civic ties in a community, will predict support for Trump or not. In the same way, in the way that Trump provided hope to so many people in these communities that have been absolutely hollowed out by bad trade deals, by the opioid crisis. And the sad fact is that in so much of this country, we don't have the neighborly ties that we used to, because we're not all in the same bowling league, to reference Robert Putnam, who's certainly referenced frequently in Alienated America. And don't you think that that has to factor into this, that just the reality that we're so much more disconnected from the people in our immediate community than we used to be?
Oh, absolutely. I think humans, we're social creatures. We crave community. For thousands of years, we've been gathering in communities from the villages of I've been watching ancient history documentaries this weekend, so this is where my mind is. But we've been gathering in communities since our entire existence. And so this political division it's tearing at the fabric of our country, but it's tearing at the fabric of who we are as just human beings. And so again, with this piece, I really just wanted to humanize this political polarization, this element to our country, and again, just make people realize that who your neighbor might have voted for should be such a small representation of who that person is. And we shouldn't be casting people out of our lives just because of the decision that they made at the ballot box.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tristan, you did a great job making that argument. Again, you can read Tristan's piece, which is headlined, "A Neighbor You Like Probably Voted for Trump." You can read that at thefederalist.com. We'll be sure to link it in the descriptions below after we wrap up the stream. Tristan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
That's Tristan Justice. He's a staff writer at The Federalist. Tristan, your Twitter handle is @JusticeTristan.
Yep, that's it.
All right. You can give Tristan a follow. I'm Emily Jashinsky, culture editor at The Federalist. We'll be back soon with more. And until then, we hope you subscribe and stay tuned for broadcasts in the future.